Hey, you guys. Welcome back to the salon. We're doing another book versus movie adaptation. I really like doing these. And I've been wanting to do this one for a really long time. So, let's get into it. So, Stir of Echoes is one of those horror movies that I pretty much always bring up when somebody asks me what I think like some of the most underrated horror films of all time are. So, the movie was actually directed by David Koepp and starred Kevin Bacon, and it came out in 1999. Now, it's based pretty loosely on Richard Matheson's short novel, which came out in 1958. Now, the plot of the movie, I guess, is pretty standard, like horror movie fare. There's a creepy psychic kid, you have some hypnosis, and you have like somebody having disturbing visions of a violent crime. But the way it's executed is really, really good. It's just very deftly directed. It's very, very chilling. And really, it kind of pains me to this day, still, this many years later, that the movie still a little bit kind of flies under the radar when people talk about like the best scary movies, even in pretty well-informed company, I've found. I've talked to several horror fans who had never even heard of it, and that was really, I think that's really like a shame. Now, I do kind of feel like it's getting to more of its due nowadays, I guess. It's sort of slowly seeping into the horror zeitgeist or whatever. So I think it's maybe more appreciated now than it was but for a while, it was one of those movies that just completely went under everybody's radar, and it was like really a shame because it was like really, really good. Now, I will note, and I think I might have brought this up in some other forums before, but Stir of Echoes, like, it's sort of a little bit of a disappearing act that happened, like, in 1999. It didn't have anything to do with the quality of the film, which is actually excellent, but it was pretty much everything to do with timing. What ended up happening was that Stir of Echoes kind of like had the misfortune of coming out. Not only was it only just a few months after the Blair Witch Project came out, which, you know, if you're around back then was a massive like cultural phenomenon, but it also came out only like 3 or 4 weeks after that 1999 supernatural juggernaut known as The Sixth Sense, directed by M. Night Shyamalan. Now, in fact, I seem to recall seeing both movies, The Sixth Sense and Stir of Echoes, in the theater within a couple of days of each other. Because I think even though Stir of Echoes opened like in early to mid-September, and I think The Sixth Sense came out in August, but The Sixth Sense was such a success that it was still playing, like by the time that came out. And by the time that I got around to seeing it, like I think I saw them both in the same week, matter of fact. Now, I guess because movie audiences can only evidently handle one ghostly movie, like per release cycle, Stir of Echoes obviously got left in the dust, made less than $22 million on a $12 million budget, which, like I said, sounds like a lot, but usually a movie has to make twice its budget back, like to even break even, so it didn't even do that. And, of course, The Sixth Sense went on to become a monster hit, actually the second highest grossing film of 1999 overall, Phantom Menace being the first one, if you were curious. Now, while I will say Stir of Echoes, I think, is a much more intimate and much more low-key film than The Sixth Sense, although I guess The Sixth Sense is, like, pretty low-key, too. But I think that Stir of Echoes is much darker, and I think it's a lot creepier than its much more successful rival film, at least in my opinion. Matter of fact, when I saw this at the theater, back in 1999, I went to like a late night showing. It was like the last showing of the evening, so it was like at 10:30, like to 12:30 or whatever. And I went there with my friend Jen. Now, back then, we used to hang out a lot, and she would always take me with her to scary movies because she was really into scary movies, but they scared the crap out of her, and she didn't want to go see them by herself. She wanted to have somebody there like me that was really into horror and was like, you know, she considered me like tough because I'd seen like all these horror movies and they didn't scare me that much. So, so she always kind of like took me with her, right? And I'd be able to like talk her out of like if she got too scared or anything like that. But I will say that the first time, like when I saw this in the theater back in 1999, ironically, after the movie was over, because like I said, it was midnight or 12:30 or something, I absolutely did not want to walk across that darkened parking lot to the car like after the movie was over. Not after seeing that. I mean, the movie really, really got under my skin, in other words. I've seen it several times since then, and it still creeps me out, but I mean, seeing in the theater the first time, I mean, that really like freaked me out. And I think it gave me a couple of nightmares as well, if I remember correctly. So after I saw the movie, I was actually really interested to read the novella it was based on. I guess technically, is it a novella? Maybe it's just a short novel. I think it's 220 pages or something like that, like at least in paperback. Now, at that point in my life, I had actually read a handful of Richard Matheson's other works. I had read I Am Legend, The Shrinking Man, Hell House, and I'd also read a compilation of his short stories that had Duel in it, which, very famously was turned into a very famous TV movie in 1971 by Steven Spielberg. But it so happened that I had never read A Stir of Echoes. Like I said, the movie is just called Stir of Echoes. The book is actually called A Stir of Echoes. It doesn't really matter. Now, although I will say I like the book quite a bit, but it is much, much different than the movie. And I'm going to go a little bit out on a limb here, and I don't usually say this kind of thing, but I thought the movie was slightly to significantly better, simply because I think the narrative was a lot more was a lot tighter and like more focused, and it didn't have as many extraneous details and storylines and stuff that didn't like feed into the main plot. I wouldn't go so far as to say that the film adaptation of Stir of Echoes is like in name only, like it's so different that, it might as well not even be the same story. I mean, the bones of both versions of the story are pretty much the same, like the broad outlines, but pretty much everything else about it, other than that, is different, like including the setting, like where it's set, the characters, some of the characters at least, and even kind of like the details, motives, and the actual resolution of the central mystery. So as we go on, I will lay out the key differences between the book and the movie. And this should probably go without saying in a video like this, even though, as usual, I'm going to say it anyway, there will be spoilers for both movie and book if you choose to forge ahead after this point, so this is your final warning. So the film version of Stir of Echoes tells the story of this kind of like down-to-earth sort of working class family who live in this close-knit neighborhood in Chicago. Tom Witzke is a phone lineman, and he's like an aspiring musician. Like he was in a band and he thought he was going to be famous, all this other kind of stuff. He has a wife named Maggie who's actually pregnant with their second child at the beginning of the movie. And the couple already have a son named Jake, who is about 6 years old or so. Now, it's established pretty much in the first couple minutes of the movie that Jake is psychic and can talk to ghosts, though it's not real clear how aware his parents are of like the extent of his powers. They seem to I don't think they know all that much about it. They just think, oh, he's like a kid and he says weird shit and like he knows things sometimes, but I don't think they think it's that big a deal. Kind of like a Danny in The Shining kind of situation. Now, in the book, the family's last name is Wallace, not Witzke. The son is actually named Richard and is about 3 years old, so much younger than in the movie. And the wife is actually named Anne, although she is pregnant at the beginning of the book, just like she is in the movie. Now, the son is only implied in the book to have some kind of paranormal sensitivity, though it does become much clearer later on that he does. Now, Tom Wallace, in the book, he works at some kind of plant or factory or something like that across the street from their house, though he has more of like an upper management type of job. So like I said, they're very like middle class, upper middle class. So the Wallaces actually live in a very stereotypical 50s era. Like I said, the book came out in 1958, very middle class, upper middle class suburb in California. So not in the Midwest at all. This is out in California. Not that it matters to a huge, it doesn't, like the setting of it doesn't really matter. But yeah, so this is one of those very Leave It to Beaver kind of like suburbs. Everybody has perfect lawns and all the women are housewives, and you kind of spend your weekends going next door to play bridge with the neighbors. Everybody knows each other, blah, blah, blah. The entire book is actually told in the first person from Tom Wallace's point of view. Now, in the movie version, pretty much less than 10 minutes in, the Witzkes go to a house party in their neighborhood. And Tom's new agey sister-in-law, Lisa, who's actually in the movie played by Ileana Douglas, who's great, she actually hypnotizes him just for shits and giggles, like it's a party trick kind of thing, because she'd kind of been dabbling in it. Like I said, she's kind of new agey, and she's like, oh, I've done it before and it's so neat, like, let me do it. So they do. Now, I honestly have to say, in the movie, I think the hypnosis scenes are some of my favorite scenes. That's part of what makes the film like really creepy to me. Like, I really like the very unsettling movie theater imagery, that great shot of Tom like sitting in the easy chair and like floating through the thing like in the theater, and all this, and all the black seats and the walls and everything. It's just like really, really creepy. And I really like Lisa's creepy voiceover as she's like talking to him, because she talks him into like the hypnosis, and then you're seeing things like from his perspective. So she's describing, you know, you're sitting in a theater and all the walls are black and all this other kind of stuff. So you're seeing like what he would be seeing like while he's being hypnotized. So anyway, in the movie, Tom goes way deep into the hypnosis, like way deeper than anyone expected, and he wakes up very, very confused, not really remembering anything that he did or said while he was under. Now, everybody else at the party is just like sitting there watching him, and they're just amazed at all the weird shit that happened, like while he was under there, which included like Tom talking about like a school bully he hadn't thought about for, you know, years and years. And also Lisa, like while he's under, she sticks a pin through his hand and tells him to bleed only out of one side of the wound and not the other. And like they actually do it, so everyone's like super freaked out. So Tom is kind of freaked out too, but then he's like, we're kind of disturbed, and he's like, yeah, I think we should go home. So him and Maggie go home shortly afterward. But all throughout the night, he keeps seeing flashes of like real disturbing shit, like something that appears to be like a violent fight, like involving a girl. There's like a really gross shit with like somebody's fingernail breaking off like on a floor. He has a vision of himself like looking into a mirror, pulling in one of his own front teeth out, shit like that. Now, later, he goes downstairs to watch TV because he can't get back to sleep because of all this disturbing shit that he's seeing, and very suddenly sees what seems to be the ghost of a teenage girl who's sitting on the couch and, like, looks to be trying to tell him something, but she can't really see. Like, her mouth is moving, but he can't hear anything. So he freaks out, obviously, as you would. Tom's son, Jake, then appears at the top of the stairs, and he's smiling, and he tells his dad, oh, you're awake now, meaning, you know, now you can see all the psychic shit too, and that you shouldn't be afraid of it. So in the book, by contrast, Tom and his wife do go to a party. This is, they go to the neighbors for like a little dinner party or a small get-together, something like that. But Tom actually ends up getting hypnotized by his younger brother-in-law, Phil, who is not a new agey type of person, but is a psychology major at UC Berkeley, who's visiting from out of town. Like, he's a young college-age guy. Like I said, I guess when they modernized it, you know, back then hypnosis was seen as like maybe more like scientific, whereas nowadays it would be more of a new agey thing. So that's why they changed out the characters. Now, the neighbors in the book whose house they're at are named Elsie and Ron, and Elsie in particular becomes a bit of an important character as the story goes on. She's kind of disliked in the neighborhood overall. She's like really overly flirtatious, and she's constantly trying to get attention. One of those people that believes she's way more irresistible than she actually is, and like a lot of people don't really like her. Now, other than that, the hypnosis goes pretty similarly to how it went in the movie. Tom dredges up a bunch of forgotten memories from his childhood, etc. In the book, Phil also gives Tom a post-hypnotic suggestion to take off his left shoe and put it in the refrigerator after he wakes up. Now, when Tom wakes up, he does it without realizing why it's weird until everybody at the party starts laughing at him. Now, in the movie, significantly, the only post-hypnotic suggestion that Lisa gave Tom was that he should be more open-minded or more open to experience or something like that, which is apparently what ends up causing Tom's, you know, you're led to believe latent psychic abilities to be unleashed. In the novel, Tom doesn't see visions of any one particular thing at first, like after he gets home from the party. He just kind of feels as though his brain is just lit up with activity all of a sudden. Like he's super anxious and like all this stuff is coming at him. Like information and emotions and impressions are like pouring in on him from all sides, exactly like a floodgate has been opened in his brain. Now, as in the movie, Tom can't sleep and goes down to the living room where he sees a ghost. But in the book, the ghost isn't a teenage girl. It's rather an older woman, like wearing a black dress, and she's just like staring at him really sadly. I think she is trying to communicate with him, but again, he can't hear her. Now, a large portion of the book, too, is actually less concerned with the one ghost story that's portrayed in the film and more focused on all the other things that Tom is seeing and kind of all the secrets that are being revealed through his new and very much unwanted talent, it should be said. While the movie concentrates pretty much entirely on the mystery of who the ghost is and how she died, with all of Tom's visions in the movie serving as partial pieces to this one enormous puzzle, the book is actually kind of broader in scope, with the murder mystery aspect being only one kind of small little part of the overarching narrative, and with some of Tom's psychic impressions actually having nothing at all to do with the ghost's identity or with the circumstances surrounding her death. So that's actually what I meant when I said that the film was much more focused. And I personally think that, as film adaptations go, this was actually like a really good decision, because even in the book, I have to say, I felt like some of the plot threads that were sort of uncovered or revealed by Tom's abilities weren't all that interesting or weren't all that necessary to the plot as a whole as like some of the others were. And you don't find out really until later on, like which ones play into the bigger mystery and which ones don't. The book, though, to be fair, is less about being a straightforward murder mystery. Was more like the movie is just more like a murder mystery / ghost story, whereas the book is more an examination of maybe like the sinister underbelly of the perfect 1950s suburbia kind of situation. Like in other words, before he was hypnotized, Tom had always perceived his friends and neighbors as being just as they appeared to be, like on the surface. But when his psychic powers got switched on, he realized that everybody he knew was harboring all kind of like hidden darknesses and evils. I mean, some of which were quite horrible. And these were all being subsumed beneath these masks of normality that they were showing to the world at large. Now, in the book, Tom is actually really tortured by his new abilities because pretty much every time he walks past somebody, he gets this overwhelming impression of like random thoughts and emotions off of them, and he can't turn it off. And this actually ends up adversely affecting his relationship with his wife, Anne. Now, the film version is only slightly similar in this regard. I kind of feel like Tom seems to be able to have more of a normal life in the movie because most of his impressions, while he does get them all the time and they do interfere with his life, but most of the impressions are relating to the murder of the girl at the center of the story. And so he doesn't seem to be as inundated with all of this information as book Tom was. So in the movie, Tom and Maggie are going to this big sporting event one night, like in the neighborhood, and they need a sitter for Jake. Now, Lisa, who normally babysits for him, can't do it, but Jake himself suggests a girl named Debbie Kozak after a supposed ghost named Samantha gives him that name. Like, they don't, like, the family doesn't know her, but she's just like, oh, this girl Samantha told me. And the mom's like, okay, fair enough. We need a babysitter. Now, when Debbie ends up coming to the house, like comes to the door, Tom keeps seeing her image like flashing red as though something is wrong with her, but he can't quite figure out like what the problem is. So him and Maggie like go ahead to the game, but Tom can't really shake the feeling that something really bad is going to happen. So he ends up sprinting home like when these feelings become overpowering. Now, once there, he actually discovers that Debbie has apparently kidnapped Jake, but he utilizes his abilities and he's able to track them to a train station. So he thinks, oh my God, she took my kid and she's gonna like take him someplace. Now, but once they get there and they talk to Debbie, they find her and she explains, I wasn't going anywhere with the kid. I just brought Jake here to talk to my mom, who works here, because she's like, I heard Jake talking to Samantha, and I'm sure that Jake knows something about this girl, Samantha, who is my sister. Now, Samantha was a 17-year-old girl with a learning disability who had vanished 6 months before, and they thought she was a runaway, but Debbie is like convinced that something else happened, and so she thinks that Jake like knows something about it or has seen her, so she kind of like just freaked out and like picked up Jake and ran her to the mom so they could talk to the mom about it. Now, Debbie actually ends up showing, like, obviously Tom and Maggie are like freaking out. They're like, oh my God, it's kidnapping. We're going to press charges. But then Debbie shows Tom a photo of Samantha and he recognizes her as the ghost. And after that point, he's like, okay, just never mind. We're going to forget this ever happened. But then after that, like Tom sort of becomes obsessed with Samantha's disappearance and starts asking about her like all around the neighborhood. A sort of analogous thing occurs in the book, though in the novel, Tom and Anne go out to dinner, not to a game, and they leave Richard, the kid, with a sitter, and who, again, they don't know. And Tom gets the feeling that something is wrong, just like in the movie, and so they both rush home, but they find out when they get there that the babysitter is actually trying to kidnap their son, and she's taken him like halfway down the street. But the weird thing about this is that the kidnapping doesn't tie in with the larger murder mystery like it does in the film. And I kind of admit in the book, I found this to be like a little odd because it seems so random. I mean, like I said, I get what he was going for with the book, but it just seemed weird that something as, you know, dire as a kidnapping like didn't tie in with like this bigger mystery, whereas in the movie it does. Now, there's also another time when Tom is at work, and this is in the book, and he has this like terrible feeling of dread and this unexplained like pain in his head. And then when he rushes home, he finds out that this big, huge can of tomatoes like fell out of a cupboard and like beamed his wife on the noggin or whatever, and it knocked her out for a minute. So he's able to kind of like know when she's hurt and stuff. Now, this event also obviously has nothing to do with the murder or the ghost story or anything like that. Incidentally, Tom also has the ability to know the gender of the baby that his wife is pregnant with, and knows exactly when one of Anne's relatives has died. I can't remember which relative it was, like her mom or dad or something like that. Now, this former event with the gender of the baby, something like that does happen in the movie. Although it's actually Maggie's new agey sister, Lisa, who psychically knows that Maggie is pregnant, like before she even knows herself, though she doesn't actually specify the gender. The latter event, which has to do with the death of one of Maggie's relatives, that also happens in the movie, where Tom like knows that one of her relatives has died, and then she gets a phone call. And that actually ends up setting up a situation where both Maggie and Jake end up being out of the house, like because they're at the relative's funeral, when Tom goes full on into like obsession and like digging up the yard of their house, like looking for the body of the murdered girl that he's become, like I said, obsessed with. Now, in addition, in the novel, there's also this whole kind of scenario, which again doesn't play into the larger narrative or the murder mystery, and that has to do with Elsie, the next door neighbor, and Tom being able to kind of probe into her mind and discovering like what a desperate and like horrible person she is. And he starts to kind of like despise her and can barely tolerate her presence after kind of being privy to her deepest thoughts, you know what I mean? And some of those concern how much she'd like to fuck him, as well as like some other people in the neighborhood. So like I said, that doesn't really play into the larger narrative either, but that's another thing that's kind of like, it's not a big part of the story, but a lot of pages are spent on it. Now, some of the visions that Tom sees in the book do actually end up tying in with the murder mystery. And these involve his friend Frank and Frank's wife Elizabeth, and also his landlords, a couple who were named Harry and Mildred. Now, before the Wallaces moved into their house, they're renting it. Harry and Mildred were renting it to Mildred's sister, whose name is Helen Driscoll. And Helen Driscoll just up and left one day, leaving only a note behind, and nobody has seen hide nor hair of her since. In the movie, Tom also has a friend and neighbor named Frank, although Frank's wife in the movie is actually named Sheila. And the couple have a son in his late teens named Adam, who, there's no book character named that. There's no analogous character. Tom's landlord in the movie is a single guy named Harry who lives, I think, across the street. And he also has a college-age son named Kurt. Again, his landlords in the book didn't have a kid. Now, movie Tom has a vision one day that he's in Frank's house and that Adam is pointing a gun at him. But then at the last second, Adam actually turns the gun on himself and fires like he's going to commit suicide. Now, Tom sees this in a vision and he's like, holy shit, that's really going to happen. So he rushes to Frank's house to try to prevent it, but it's already happened, like it's already too late. Now, Adam does survive, but he's left in critical condition. Now, Book Tom also has a vision involving a gun, but in that case, Elizabeth has actually shot her husband, Frank, and then passed out. Now, Frank, again, survives, but tells the authorities that the shooting was an accident and that he isn't going to press charges against Elizabeth. So in the novel, Tom has been getting more and more convinced that Helen Driscoll, who lived in the house before him and was his landlord's sister, didn't actually skip town, but was murdered and has been appearing to him as the ghost in the black dress that he saw earlier. Now, at first, Tom suspects Harry, his landlord, believing that Harry and Helen were having an affair and that Harry killed her to keep his wife Mildred from finding out about it. Figuring that the body is probably buried on the premises, he starts digging in the crawl space and eventually finds Helen's remains. Now, the resolution of the murder mystery in the movie plays out similar in some ways, but completely different in other ways. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Tom in the movie is certain that the teenager Samantha Kozak didn't just run away, but was actually murdered and appears to him again like as the ghost in his house. Now, while the wife and son are away, like at the relative's funeral, like I said, Tom starts acting on an overwhelming impulse to dig. He keeps getting this impulse to dig. So he tears up the whole entire yard of the house looking for her remains, but doesn't actually find them until later on when he accidentally knocks down this very hastily assembled like brick wall, which is in the basement. And then behind that, he finds Samantha's body. It's kind of like mummified and it's wrapped in plastic. So, Movie Tom's psychic abilities clue him into the fact that Adam and Kurt, the college-age sons of Frank and Harry, had actually lured the girl, because like I said, she was, mentally challenged or whatever. Like, they actually lured her into the then empty house, and they had attempted to rape her. Now, she was killed during the course of this attack, and rather than face the music, the boys confessed it to their dads, and the dads helped them cover up the crime and hide the body, telling anybody who asked that Samantha just ran away. Now, Frank admits to all this, like, after Tom confronts him, and then he trains a gun on Tom and tells him to, like, beat cheeks. And then after that, like, Tom hears a single gunshot and assumes that Frank has shot himself, like, out of guilt or whatever. Kurt and Harry, though, they are not about to go down for their deeds, and they actually threaten to kill Tom, taking Maggie hostage when she kind of tries to intervene in the situation. But then it turns out that the not dead Frank saves the day, and he emerges just in time to kill both Harry and Kurt, after which Samantha's ghost like briefly appears and smiles, and she's apparently mollified that her murder has been solved, and her mother and sister now have closure about what happened to her. And then the Witskys end up like moving out of the house, moving out of the neighborhood. Now, in the novel, it's actually Elizabeth who threatens Tom with a gun, and that's because she ends up being the one who murdered Helen. Tom was actually correct in his supposition that Harry and Helen were having an affair, but Elizabeth's husband, Frank, was also banging her because, she was the town bike, I guess. And so, like, Elizabeth killed her in a jealous rage, basically, like, beating her to death with a fireplace poker, I think it was, and then, like, stashed her body in the crawl space. Now, there is, like, an ensuing struggle, just like there was in the movie, but the Wallaces get away, no one gets hurt. Elizabeth gets carted off to a mental health facility, and that's all how that's resolved. So, as you can see, there are loads and loads of differences between the book and the film. And it took me like forever to like parse all of this stuff out because there were so many. Now, like I said, the rough outline of the stories in both media are pretty much the same, but all of the details other than that are pretty much completely different or happen for different reasons or whatever. I actually like both versions quite a lot. And I think it's great that you can actually read the book and see the movie without worrying that one is going to spoil the other because they're completely different. Like I said, there's some characters in the book that don't have analogs in the movie and vice versa. They're both dissimilar enough in their focus and outcomes that you can enjoy each for, their own thing. That said, though, I think I actually do prefer the movie overall in this situation, which, like I said, I don't usually say. Not just because I find in the movie, like, the more modern, like, earthy, down-to-earth characters more likable and relatable, because I kind of feel like the characters in the novel are much more, they're very 50s, they're very buttoned up, they're very disingenuous and, like, not as likable, or relatable. So I kind of like the characters in the movie better, and not gonna lie, I love Kevin Bacon and he's great in this, but I also like the movie better just because everything, like all of the visions that Tom has in the movie are either directly or indirectly linked to Samantha Kozak's murder. So everything like ties together a lot more neatly, and it's just like seems like more thematically kind of just all one thing. Whereas the book has kind of like a bunch of loose threads that, yes, while they speak to like the larger theme of the story, maybe, like I said, that being all of the things that people in suburbia are hiding, like even though they all look perfect on the surface. But in regards to the actual murder mystery, a lot of the details just seem kind of superfluous and like they didn't really need to be in there. But I will say that the book and the movie are two completely different experiences, and I obviously like recommend both of them because they're both very, very good for their own thing. So that will do it for this book versus movie installment. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to help the channel grow, and I will see you in the salon next time. Bye.